Hello and welcome to yet another episode of Smart Indian Agriculture on the Federal.com. I am Vivian Fernandez. Extreme weather events are occurring more frequently. Last year, the country's wheat output shrank because of warmer than usual March. The rice and sugarcane harvests were affected by a prolonged dry spell in North India. Even when we have not normal monsoons, we have a few days of downpour and long intervals of scanty rain. Peninsular India and the fragile ecologies of the Himalayan region are particularly vulnerable to a warming planet. What can the budget do to promote climate smart agriculture? How do we pursue sustainable intensification when arable land is shrinking because of urbanization and more people have to be fed and clothed? To discuss these issues, we have with us Dr. M L Jat. He is Director, Global Research Programme on Resilient Farms and Farming Systems at Icrisat, the Hyderabad based international organization for research in crops in the semi arid tropics. Earlier, he was a scientist with CIMMYT, the Mexican Institute for Maize and Wheat Improvement, where Norman Borlaug, the father of the Green Revolution, did his research. Dr. Jat, welcome to this program.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Jat, is there a need for the budget to incentivize climate smart agriculture?
Certainly, because as you indicated, climate change is posing serious threat on our all food systems, agriculture, the farmers. So it's making more vulnerable, and we are facing the consequences. And I think when we talk about agriculture, it's not only the agriculture is impacted because of the climate change, but agriculture is in a way also contributing to the climate change. So it's a complex problem because when we talk about globally, the food systems are contributing to almost one third of the global anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions, which is intensifying the climate crisis. And then that is negatively impacting the agriculture. So I think we need to prioritize and put more investments, more focus on the climate smart agriculture or climate resilient agriculture. Otherwise, there is a problem. There's a serious problem.
All right. So earlier budgets gave allocation for organic farming and paramparagat or traditional farming. These farming methods are low in chemical use and the crop varieties are resilient and there is low emission of oxides of carbon and nitrogen. Are you suggesting that the budget should increase the allocation for these cultivation practices?
Yeah, so I think those are the areas where we got some niche. Some areas where organic can go, some areas where paramparagat krishi can go. But I think we need to see a big picture. We have to feed the country at the same time, make the system more sustainable, more resilient. And from that perspective, we should talk about more of from regenerative agriculture, which is not exclusively the chemical-free agriculture, but I think if we talk about regenerative agriculture, whatever practices or the systems or the strategy which contribute to improving the soil health, building the carbon, which can help in reducing the biodiversity loss, and which can also improve on adaptation and mitigation to the climate change. And so, whatever practices contribute to these three major aspects are regenerative. So that is not essentially the organic, but I think that there is a way balancing the use of those systems and contributing there. So essentially, we should be taking that big picture and putting a focus on regenerative agriculture rather than the commodity or component focus investment. We need to have that holistic approach, and that needs investment, greater investments.
Okay, so we have the green revolution, which is high output, high input agriculture. You know, we had these hybrids which were responsive to more doses of water and fertilizer, and they gave more output. How is regenerative agriculture different from the green revolution agriculture?
See, the green revolution, as you indicated, the high input intensive agriculture, which was a need of that time because we wanted to have food. So we pushed, but I think, and I don't see a problem as long as you do the balance use of those agrochemicals or even in the intensive agriculture, the balance. All the science evidence indicate that if you are on the balanced approach, there is no problem. But I think there are a lot of imbalances, skewing, for example, the fertilizer towards more of nitrogen on the urea rather than the balancing. Because all the evidence indicate if you got a balanced use of chemical fertilizers, there is no negative impact on the soil health and anything. But I think that imbalance, created a problem. But we have in that process we have degenerated our resources, so we cannot afford to that degeneration. So we have to stop that degeneration and at the same time regenerate all our resources. And in that perspective, I think we need to take a different approach. So looking at the food security, the nutritional security, all those aspects, but in a sustainable way. That's where the regenerative agriculture comes into the picture. And when we talk about regenerative agriculture, it's a balancing. I think we need to define what works where. And when we talk about regional, you indicated about high input responsive crop varieties, the hybrids. But I think when we talk about regenerative agriculture, where is the breeding plan? Where is the breeding strategy for regenerative agriculture? Because when we talk about some management, those crop varieties should be adapted and fit well to that scenario. So we talk about organic or whatever, but I think we need to have a breeding program for the varieties which fits well into that particular situation. So regenerative or organic or natural, which is missing. So there's a
Okay.
need for investment on the breeding for those varieties. That's one, and then associated systems.
Now, you mentioned about the imbalance in green revolution. Is the imbalance because of the practice, the green revolution practices, or because of certain policies? For example, urea pricing. We price urea so low that farmers tend to use more of urea rather than potassic or phosphatic fertilizers, which are priced very high. Similarly, there's overuse of water because electricity is almost free. So can we say that our policies are faulty and not the green revolution agricultural practices themselves are not at fault or themselves do not create the imbalance?
Certainly. So it's not the practice. I think the practices were developed with all these science-based systems. So practices are not a problem, but the way you apply those practices, the way you incentivize those practices creates that whole problem. So certainly the policy, for example, we talk about water. If everything is free, what is the incentive for the farmers to reduce the water? You're talking about diversification. Now, if you are putting 17,000 rupees electricity per hectare subsidy in Punjab and so how come farmer will stop growing rice? And we talk about millets and other crops. And I see we have done some sort of analysis. There are opportunities for diversification to happen in some of those areas with the crops like millets, crops like pulses and oil seeds. So, but then the policy is important. A policy not only for incentivizing or the subsidizing the water and fertilizers, but also policy around the markets. I think
Mhm.
that's something important. So yes, policy has to do a lot around, not the practices.
Okay. Now, you laid a lot of emphasis on breeding, and you said that there is not enough attention being paid to breeding. Now, are you saying that the seeds that were meant for green revolution for high chemical use agriculture, they are quite different from the seeds that you require for regenerative agriculture, which is more from less agriculture? You get more output with reduced use of inputs. So, do we have certain kinds of seeds? Do we need to develop those kind of seeds that have technology embedded in them that can allow us to get more output with less inputs?
Yeah, so the seed or the variety is one, but first is crop. So there are crops which are really the how high output, low input kind of scene. For example, pulses needs less of those inputs. Some of the oil seeds, some of the millets, all those things, so, and they are resilient. They require less water. So I think that's a one approach we can straightway plan to diversify the high input requiring crops from the low input requiring more resilient crops, which also contribute to the nutrition, the nutri cereals, the pulses. That's one. But when we talk about the domain, the specific domain, so our breeding programs were like high input responsive varieties. That was the focus. Now we are talking about the low input. And so those varieties will not perform there. That means we need to have a strategy, breed varieties which perform better under low input agriculture, and that's what we are trying to do. So when you start regenerating and all those things, I think you need the varieties. I think it's not only the practice, management practice, but also the combination of the variety, the management. That interaction is something important. So what I'm saying is, I mean, there are a lot of effort, a lot of breeding going on, but then when we talk about those new things, I think we need to have a breeding strategy around those things also. We're talking about natural farming, but are we breeding for natural farming? Are we breeding for organic agriculture? Are we breeding for regenerative agriculture? I think that's what is something very, very important.
If I understand you right, what you are saying is that there are certain crops that can give us more output, that are more nutritious, but use less input. So, are you saying that we should grow these crops in combination with other crops? And in which case, can you, for example, give us a concrete example with regard to the Indo-Gangetic plains, Punjab, Haryana, Uttar Pradesh? If we have to follow regenerative agriculture, we do rice and wheat. Now, how can we integrate the other crops into them? Are you talking about cropping systems?
Yes, certainly. We have to optimize the systems, and that optimization should be based on the natural resources. So I think this country needs a specialized farming zone approach, like what we talk about SEJ. Because why I'm saying, because until we don't have this specialized farming zone, we cannot create the infrastructure, the market infrastructure, the mechanization, all those aspects. So you have defined zones, and around those zones, if you can create those infrastructure, I think their market linkages will be better. But those zones should be defined from the perspective of the sustainability of the natural resources. So for example, we are saying, this much number of zones are like dark zone where water tables are falling down. Now our cropping systems designing should be in a way where we halt, not only halting the decline in the water table, but also regenerating, taking them or upbringing the water tables, and at the same time that provides the same economic profitability to the farmer. So the optimization of system is important.
So,
Also,
let's give an example from Punjab, because there are a large number of blocks where which are dark zones where water table has gone down. In the case of Punjab, how would you implement your strategy?
so in case of Punjab, I think there are areas. For example, we have seen, and there are science evidence that if you go for a maize, mustard, mung bean system, which brings like cereal, which brings oil seed, which brings a pulse, that's the most profitable system. And also from the soil health perspective, from nutrition perspective, from everything, and from water perspective, there is a clear niche. There are areas where you can have the millets. So, and the millets, not only the pearl millet, but I think the minor millets, which fits into a shorter window between the two crops, which bring the additionality and then provide economic incentive or opportunity to the farmer. How can we diversify? There are areas where soybean can be grown. So I think we need to define, one size doesn't fit all. But I think we need to define depending on. There are areas in Punjab where rice productivity is low. That those are the clear areas where other crops can compete and can be diversified. So I think
Yeah,
there are
I
there.
got your point. Are you saying that when you grow rice and wheat, if you, for example, you mentioned soybean, you mentioned mung bean or pulses, and these pulses, since they take nitrogen from the atmosphere and store it in the soil, they can help the other crops also, rice or wheat, for example. And and this is how you have a cropping system that is regenerative. Is that what you are suggesting?
Yeah, exactly. So they are not only taking using less of the nitrogen, but also they're contributing to the succeeding crop through atmospheric nitrogen fixation. And there are a whole sort of biologicals now. I think we haven't harnessed the power of the biology, the soil biology. And I think when we talk about regenerative agriculture, we should be thinking about harnessing the power of soil biology. There are a lot of diversity of those microbes which can contribute significantly in terms of regenerating our soils.
We had a program on soil biologicals on this show some weeks back. But let me get back to what you mentioned about zones. Now, in Punjab, for example, we are saying that farmers should grow less of rice and instead they should grow maize. But that but the transition has not happened. One is because there is no open-ended procurement of maize, as happens in the case of rice. So when farmers grow rice, the government procures all of it. But when maize is grown, it's not procured. Now you are saying that we should follow a kind of zone approach, special economic SEZ or special economic zone kind of approach. In the case of maize, for example, why do you think that is important?
Because see, if I see the local demand of maize in Punjab alone, we're bringing all the maize from Bihar, where there is a water, and we are producing rice here where there's a problem of water. Why the the market people are not taking that maize here because of the uncertainty. They are not sure whether farmer is going to grow next year or not. So the assurance is something important, and I think the one approach. So, and that's what we've been working at Icrisat, taking this landscape approach. Because when we talk about transforming the agri-food systems, we have to have a kind of entry point. Entry point is a landscape. And we have clear examples created. For example, Bundelkhand. So when we approach that landscape, I think you are treating the whole landscape, not the individual plot. The diversification problem with the diversification is we are talking the individual plot level demonstrations. And those plot level demonstrations are neither connected to the market, not creating the volume. And there are also other problems, bird, animals, things. And so because of that uncertainty is not happening. But if you create a cluster, at a certain landscape, I think all problems can be solved. And we have seen. So we can regenerate the resources, optimize the systems, and you create a volume. There was one of the landscape what we are working in Bundelkhand in Jhansi, and I've seen when we started that landscape, that's a 5,000 hectare area where the groundnut was 240 hectare only. And when we started with landscape approach, that gone to the 2,100 hectare. That's the kind of volume. That's the diversification. I think that's the diversification focus. Otherwise, if you don't take that approach, we need to bring. See, we have those lot of.
I got it. What you're saying is that it does not help if individual farmers grow a particular crop. For example, if they do groundnuts or maize, only when you have a cluster approach and when you have enough quantity, will traders come over there? Will people set up the infrastructure? For example, in the case of maize, you require drying facilities. If maize moisture is not brought down to, let's say, 15% or so, there's a problem of aflatoxin.
Yeah.
So only when you have a large quantity of the crop will the supporting infrastructure come into that area. And that is why for sustainable agriculture, you are saying that we should follow a cluster or zone approach.
True, true. Because I mean, not only the market, but also when we talk about mechanization, I mean, labor is not available. And if you go to the harvester, the combined harvester is equipped to harvest the rice and wheat, not the maize, because maize needs a different header. And that needs 5 lakh rupees. So nobody is going to put a 5 lakh rupees header to harvest few acres, right? So once you have the volume, then the header will come, the harvester will come, the drying facility or dryers will come, and then automatically will be connected to the market.
Mm-hmm. You spoke about creating seeds that are resilient to climate change. Seeds that are drought resistant, that are resistant to flooding, or that are salinity tolerant. Now, how do we create these seeds? Are you suggesting that climate resilient agriculture necessarily depends on genetic modification, gene editing, and those kind of techniques, or can we do it with conventional breeding as well?
No, I think we need a mixed approach. Everything is important, but there is no silver bullet. And that's what the approach, looking at the diversity of our systems in this country, I think we need diverse approach. One approach is not going to help. So I think gene editing is important. That's required in some place. Conventional breeding is, another which is required somewhere. So mix of those approaches. I mean, it's not like discriminating one thing with the another thing is not going to help us. We need to have an open mind, a mixed approach. What is required where? So that's something important.
Mm-hmm. So one of the ways in which agriculture contributes to global warming, to earth warming, is through emissions. One is tractor emissions. And then, of course, there are emissions of nitrous oxides. How do we reduce this? Is there a way in which we can reduce tractor emissions, for example?
Yeah. So when we talk about the emissions in agriculture, the nitrogen is the major one, which is contributing. And I think we have to optimize our nitrogen usage. And there are ways. Our efficiency is very low. So there are ways if we can, get rid of this broadcast application of the urea. If we can go with the banding, drilling of the urea is one way. If we can go with the fertigation, so that saves on water, but also and we have done that work increase the nitrogen use efficiency significantly. How can we bring a legume into the system which can build and then help? Also, the biological sources. I know now there are a lot of biologicals available. So I think a mixed approach can help us, and we can reduce the nitrogen usage significantly, which minimize the emissions. The another one is on water. So that's the second factor which contribute. And I think our water use efficiency is also low, and we cannot afford to go
So
that.
are you suggesting that we go in for micro irrigation on a large scale?
Certainly, there is no other way. We should be going, and in areas, especially in the dark zone, I would suggest that either we bring a diversified system or we stop flood irrigation. We cannot afford the flood irrigation. There is no way we cannot sustain for a long time on those things. So micro irrigation is something important. When we talk about smart agriculture, I think now we are advancing in all those artificial intelligence, machine learning, digital technologies. We need to bring everything together so that we don't waste the water.
How do we reduce tractor emissions? You said there are ways in which we can reduce tractor emissions. How?
So tractor. I think the delays, is something which is contributing significantly. Not only from the perspective of the diesel fuel burning, but also oxidation of the carbon in the soil with that intensive delays, which accelerate the erosion and also loss of the soil carbon and emitting. So if you can reduce the intensity of delays, and there is a way, there is a proven conservation agriculture has been adopted globally over 205 million hectares. And we have a whole huge scope and all the evidence to accelerate the adoption of conservation agriculture, which minimize the tractor use. Just in single pass, you can plant your crops, so you reduce the emission, you build the soil health, and also emission from the soil. So
So
yeah, there are
are
ways.
you saying that it is possible to grow crops without plowing the fields?
Yes, very much. Every crop can be grown. Even we are putting the potatoes are grown in Bihar without delays. So, obviously there are whole sort of science evidence, and I myself been working over 2 decades, and there's a good work going on at different institutions. ICR is doing all fantastic work on conservation agriculture, but I think we need to have the strategy, the policies in place to promote those kind of regenerative conservation agriculture is one way of regenerative agriculture.
Now,
So
you said worldwide, 205 million hectares are under no-till or low-till agriculture. What is the status in India? Has this practice gained ground? Has it been widely adopted?
yeah, I think we are making progress. So I don't have the exact statistics. The rough estimates are like quite a few million hectares of area is already there in no-till. We are talking about direct seeding of rice, which is going intensively. No-till wheat, and the one of the problem of the residue burning. So we're talking conservation agriculture as a solution through happy seeder. Now PAU have developed that smart seeders. There are ways. So yes, there's a significant scope. The farmers are traditionally doing no-till agriculture when there was no plow and the blocks, so they were doing. But I think there is a significant scope, and many countries, they adopted conservation agriculture. Look at the Australia, because of the water and because of the land degradation, the adoption have gone up, very fast. So I think the kind of situation, I think we should target the conservation agriculture in the rain-fed areas where there is win-win, a multiple win rather, I would say, not only reducing the soil erosion, but also having the more availability of the water and improving productivity. So there's a whole lot of scope around.
Mhm. Now, you mentioned about millets and how they are socially useful crops because they use less of water and less of inputs. But what is the productivity of millets? I think is less than 1 ton per hectare. Do we have hybrids in millets that are responsive? to input applications?
I mean, there are a whole lot of work. I think my institute, Icrisat, has been doing over 5 decades with other national systems. So, all sort of improved varieties, hybrid for all the millets are available. It's not the 1 ton. I think we have a potential. We can have a 5 tons of the yield of apple millet. You can, I mean, so that potential is there, but as long as we use it like a subsistence agriculture kind of thing, then you end up there. But I think now we are in an international year of millets, right? And that's what government of India, is taking lead. And I think we should identify the clear niche for the millets, considering the factors on the water, on the environmental aspect, on the droughts, and all those things. And we should clearly target, but the targeting will also need some market opportunities for the farmers to grow millets. But I see huge scope for the millets to grow. Those are the nutri cereals. We talk
Yes,
about nutri.
that's right. India is mainly a rice growing country, though we also grow a lot of wheat. Now, you mentioned direct seeded rice, which is, of course, planting rice without puddling the fields, without impounding water in the paddies, and without transplanting. Now, when you do direct seeded rice, what I understand is that there's a lot of weed growth. Normally, in the case of paddies where water is impounded, the water acts as a herbicide. Now, when you do direct seeding of rice, there's a lot of weed growth. How do you control those weeds?
Yeah. So when you change the practice, and that's the classic thing. That means we've been using water as a herbicide. Can we afford to use water as a herbicide? Because we are pounding water. Rice doesn't require that much water. We're pounding water to control weeds. We cannot afford to do that. But in terms of the direct seeded rice, yes, there are technologies, solutions, packages available to control weeds. I don't see any problem in managing the weeds in direct seeding.
You mean to say that we have to use herbicides to control the weeds?
Certainly, even in the transplanted farmers are. But I think balancing, the optimal use of the herbicide, the way we use them is something important, not the indiscriminate use of the herbicides.
Do we use herbicide indiscriminately? Because I think when we compare ourselves to Europe uses them much more than we do in India because these are expensive and farmers cannot afford them. But also at the same time, I find that the government has a certain intolerance to herbicides. For example, take the case of glyphosate. The government has said that only licensed pest control operators can apply glyphosate, and glyphosate is not allowed to be used for many crops. It can be used in tea gardens, I suppose, but not for crops. So, do you think that the government must also change its attitudes to some of these chemical usages?
No, I think, yeah, there was some sort of confusions around, but recently there was a question in the parliament, and I think the Minister of Agriculture clearly, mentioned that we haven't banned, but we should be cautious in use. The way we apply should not be indiscriminate. So, and that's valid. But I think they are not saying no.
Mhm. So, Dr. Jha, to sum up what you have said so far, you are saying that from input intensive agriculture, we should go towards move to regenerative agriculture where there's balanced use of chemicals, where we use farmyard manure so that we can improve the texture of the soil, its water retention capacity. We also use soil microbes, biologicals, so that more of the nutrients stored in soil becomes available to plants. We use less of water, we don't do plowing, and we adopt an integrated approach, a zonal approach, a cluster approach, so that farmers can get the necessary infrastructure and other support services. I'm afraid we're running out of time. Thank you very much for your insights and for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Subscribe to the Federal's YouTube page for more interesting updates.